So here we go. So I'm Sarah Tamborski, and I'm the Director of Clinical Services here at CHAT, and I'll be the moderator this afternoon for our webinar. Before we begin our discussion on hyperlexia, I want to share a little bit about CHAT. We are a nonprofit speech clinic. We're located just around the Chicagoland area, and this year marks our 41st anniversary. I'm very excited about that. Up until last year, we were the Center for Speech and Language Disorders, often known as CSLD. And the name and brand shifted to CHAT, which stands for Communication, Health, Advocacy, and Therapy. And we did that to kind of help expand our mission to include more social justice and advocacy work. Beginning with our hyperlexia focus in the early 1980s, we've long been the go-to place for people with few, if any, other options. And today, as COVID has really exponentially grown the universe of children with limited therapy options, we're expanding our teletherapy services so that many under-resourced and twice exceptional children can get some supports. So at the end of our webinar today, our Executive Director, Corinne Fiore, will take a few minutes to share some additional supports that we offer and the possibility for additional webinars on topics like this and kind of other topics. So some logistics on how this afternoon is going to work. So the webinar is going to be a question and answer style. But because we have a lot of people here, which we're very excited about, there's a lot of questions and we might not be able to address all of them live. But if you do have some questions you would like answered in addition to the ones you submitted earlier, please click the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And you could type your question right there. That's going to be the best method to communicate with us. Currently, your microphones and your videos are disabled, and we don't know if we're going to have a lot of time to answer people who raise their hands. So the Q&A box is going to be the best way to do that. We're thrilled about a really big turnout, but that means there are a lot of questions. So we apologize if we can't get to every single one of them today. But we should get started. So let me introduce this afternoon's speakers. We have Ms. Phyllis Kupperman, our extraordinary founder, who really doesn't need an introduction. She's dedicated her life and her career to supporting and serving children with hyperlexia and their families. We also have Ms. Kira Nally. She is our Assistant Director of Teletherapy and Twice Exceptional Services. Kira has been with CHAT for over 5 years and has spent the last few years pioneering our teletherapy services, and she leads our consultative practice for hyperlexia families. So Phyllis, Kira, you guys ready?
I think so.
All right. So we have just over 105 people joining us right now. We have people from all over the world, and we want to extend a special thank you to some participants as far away as New Zealand and Sweden, Philippines, Canada, all over the US. And we have parents as well as teachers, SLPs, OTs, a lot of professionals. So there's kind of a wide range of background knowledges and experience with hyperlexia. So while some of you may be experts, we thought that given the wide breadth that we'd start with some very basics. So to kick us off, Phyllis, what is hyperlexia?
Okay, so you know, as I've worked with many kids with hyperlexia over the years, I tend to say, well, you know, hyperlexia, first of all, just means precocious reading. We use the definition of hyperlexia to be precocious reading within the context of another developmental disability. Sometimes autism spectrum disorder, sometimes language disorder, sometimes social pragmatic disorder, nonverbal learning disability, a whole host of things. We have kids who have epilepsy, and so we think that it is a neurological wiring difference, and some of the new scanning devices allow us to see the different connectivity that that the brain has, and so we think that there's really a neurological base, but we can think of it as a learning difference, a learning style difference, and that would be the the main thing. These kids learn differently. They learn reading precociously, well before the age of 5, sometimes 2, 3 years old, and they can decode almost everything. Many of them have language issues. They learn language in a different way. And so we try to teach them the way that they learn. And that sounds simple, and very often I say, I mean, these guys want to make me a t-shirt that says hyperlexia, it is not rocket science. So,
Yeah.
so I say this all the time. It is, to me, very logical that if a child has a precocious skill, you use that skill to develop other skills. So that does that answer the question, you think?
Yeah, I think that gets kind of to the basics of it. Kira, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, you pretty much covered all the basis of the general what is hyperlexia. It's precocious
Okay.
reading.
I think off of that, the next kind of one that kind of goes hand in hand is kind of how is someone diagnosed with hyperlexia? What does that process look like?
Okay, so the diagnosis is really basically the same diagnosis that you would do for any other developmental disability, plus a reading evaluation of some sorts. And sometimes it's very informal, and sometimes we use a screening test to identify decoding as well as comprehension. And the comprehension, of course, mirrors the language comprehension. And also the background information that these kids have. So otherwise, it's a pretty standard diagnostic procedure that you would do for anybody that would come into a speech and language center or a psychological, for the psychological evaluation.
Yeah, and
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I think one thing to follow up with that is it is more of kind of a descriptor in that it isn't a diagnosis in the DSM, so it's not a medical diagnosis.
Right.
Yes, that's correct. So the issue is, and the reason that there's confusion is that it is not an official diagnosis. It is not in the DSM in any of the incarnations of the DSM. It was mentioned along with pervasive developmental disorder in the previous issue, but it's not in the 2013 DSM. It very often overlaps with autism spectrum, but over the years that we've been at the center, the definition for autism spectrum disorder has changed. And so in this one, there is really, you have to add language disorder. You can add, or we usually say add language disorder plus hyperlexia. The problem with that is that very often when people see kids, they look at the deficits and then they say, oh, well, he could read, but so what? But we say, oh no, so what? we say, no, this is the most important thing.
So I quite often tell families when I'm trying to support them with getting an evaluation closer to them, that really any speech path can do this assessment. What makes a hyperlexia assessment different, though, is that rather than just looking at the areas that kiddos are struggling in or the areas that are difficult, we're looking to identify the strength and how that strength really supports this language piece. And so I will generally do, for the speech path listening, I'll still do the self or the PLS, and then if I'll do it just normally, and then I'll supplement it by writing out my questions or writing out the directions to see if that helps any, and then I record that as informal information. I know Phyllis and I both like to do an informal WH question test because that's typically an area of difficulty. And then we do a lot of kind of informal family training. So it's a lot of observation. It's a lot of playing with the child and seeing how he best communicates naturally. And so we're just really trying to determine the strength in reading and how strong that is too. When we do a reading assessment, we're kind of measuring the difference between decoding skills and comprehension skills and seeing how we can kind of work to bridge that gap as well. So that's just a little bit of how we're modifying a typical speech and language eval that any speech path can do.
Yeah, a good
So
follow-up question, Phyllis, that we got too is the different types of hyperlexia, hyperlexia 2 versus 3, and what do those mean?
Okay, my friend for many, many years is Dr. Treffert, who is the person that talks about hyperlexia 1, 2, and 3. And we've had many discussions. For a while, I think people were thinking it was a bright line between the three. I think hyperlexia 1 doesn't need to have a diagnosis. These are kids that read precociously but don't have any other symptoms. And Dr. Treffert's idea of separating 2 and 3 was that he realized that what happens very often is that because children are narrowly focused on letters and numbers and reading and words, they may get a diagnosis of ASD when they don't have the full syndrome of ASD. And so I was very excited. First of all, I've been corresponding with Dr. Treffert for probably about 20 years, and we've never met, even though he's in Wisconsin and I'm in Illinois, and we're very close together, but we really have never met. But then they had a workshop that they invited me to, and I was very excited to see Dr. Treffert talking about 1, 2, and 3 as a Venn diagram rather than a separate, two separate diagnoses. And so at any rate, every single child that I've ever seen, and I've seen hundreds of them, are different from each other. They're all individuals. And so putting them in a neat box isn't really necessary because we really, in order to treat them, you have to deal with what you see and not what number they have.
Yeah. One of the things you talk about is that hyperlexia is kind of a learning style, and you mentioned Gestalt processing. What does that mean?
Okay, so one of the things, this was a light bulb experience that I had in the early 80s when I was working mainly with children with autism. And Dr. Barry Prezant, in his early years, did some studies both on echolalia and on Gestalt processing. And and he based it on another researcher who said there's really two ways that we process language. One is by analytic processing, and most typical kids have 2 words or 3 words, and then they can recombine them in lots of different ways. And so then they can say, daddy, go daddy, up, daddy, go, but the Gestalt processors actually look for patterns in the language. And so they're very good at repeating songs or repeating once they get a few words. But they have difficulty recombining the words into new things. So it does sound echoey, but after a while, they learn how to do that. And most kids do some Gestalt processing in their development, the typical kids. And because they can learn songs, or they can learn see you later, alligator, or things like that. But then they're able to create their own sentences. But the kids that we see with hyperlexia very often depend on repeating scripts and repeating whole phrases and trying to plug them into the right places as they try to communicate. Does that answer that?
Yeah, no, I think we got to. I think, related to that, we have a family that asked about their child uses a lot of echolalia. Like, what do you do with that?
Yeah, so Barry Present again talked about echolalia as being a turn-taking attempt by kids who process language in Gestalt processing ways. And so we used, when I first, many years ago, was studied it in school, that we tried to eliminate echolalia. But now really, for years, people have realized that we should use the echolalia, the echoed speech, and then try to help the kids modify that. But it is their attempt to take a turn or to try to understand or process, and it's a useful thing, actually.
I use scripting a lot in therapy, and I'm expecting scripting. And so some of the modeling that I'll do is I model first person language so that when the child is scripting, it's coming out grammatically appropriate. So if you're expecting your child or predicting that your child wants to say, I want milk, then rather you modeling, you want milk, or Teddy wants milk, you can model, I want milk, have him script and repeat and then give back. And so you're kind of teaching that functional echolalia and that functional script. I use that as a major therapy tool. So it's a strength to me.
Yeah. And I think that kind of goes up building on like strengths. So how do you tap into the wonderful strengths that hyperlexia kids have to work on some of the areas that they struggle with?
Okay, so years ago, there was a organization that we started, which is, we also had a Canadian branch called the American Hyperlexia Association, or the Canadian Hyperlexia Association. And the theme was, if in doubt, write it out. Or if a child reads, you should write. So this is the essence of the strength-based therapy that we think of. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to, every kiddo is going to have different goals and things that they need to be working on, but kind of what you got to use those strengths that they have. And a lot of times with these hyperlexic students, it's, this great reading skills, but maybe it's a great memory, maybe it's a super interest in a given activity. And how can you use one of those strengths to work on whatever goal that you want to work on?
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's the trick. That's the trick. So therapists and parents really need to kind of step back and look at the children and see what it is that they would like to say, or what they are able to say, and what they and then what we do is write them out. We may use several. Kira's going to show you some really cute things that are online. But I had been for many years the queen of Post-it notes, so I'd make a Post-it note for the things that the kids would want to say, and because they could read the Post-it note, and or I could have several Post-it notes, and they can choose the answer. And that multiple choice, kind of visual multiple choice, or the seeing what they need to do in print, is one of the ways that they do it. And many of the kids have amazing memories, and can from time to time, years can pass, and then they can tell you exactly what
Yeah,
it was that they worked on and what they loved.
If only we could all have the memory of a hyperlexic person. We'd all be very lucky.
Yeah.
I use a couple of other strategies as well. So like Phyllis was saying, if they're going to read, then we're just going to write. So I tell most of my families to have whiteboards in every room of the house. Um, and then I'll write down, you know, predicting what the child might be asking or wanting to say, and just writing out that script. Similar to how we may naturally be modeling language verbally, you know, you might not even realize, but you're recasting what your little kid is saying in a full sentence. So, you know, your child might say, want milk, and you might model back verbally, I want milk, or you want milk. So you're just doing that in writing now to provide those concrete scripts, visual scripts for your kiddos. And then I'll kind of scaffold that back with, now I might not say the whole sentence, I want milk. I might just say, I want, and draw a line. So you're visually representing that there needs to be a word in place that then the child can then kind of fill in. And sometimes they like to fill in with writing and spelling rather than verbally saying that, but that's still very functional communication using novel vocabulary. So giving that. And then I think this is also kind of tying into the interest, right? And I think, you know, 99% of our families are saying, oh, my kiddo's favorite toy is these little magnet letters or these magnet numbers. And so you can absolutely play with those, but you can also turn those into therapy tools. So one of my favorite things is I'll get those letters that they're so attached to and hide them around the room, and we have to do hide and seek. And then you can use these letters and their fascination and work on, where did you find it, answering questions. You can work on prepositions. The L was under the couch. You can work on labeling things. You know, the L was next to the couch is what you're working on labeling. And so just really using those strengths and those passions and those interests to guide therapy. And then, you know, you're going to have an engaged, motivated, learning child.
Yeah, so many of the kids, I think the point of modeling from the perspective of the child that Kara was talking about is very important, because I wish I had $1 for every kid that used to come in and say, do you want milk? Meaning, I want milk, that is a very important point, that we visually and auditorily model what the child should say from the child's point of view, which is a little hard at the time, but most people can kind of figure it out.
And I think to go off of a little bit different, so are there any specific strategies that you can still use with these strengths for someone who may be a non-verbal but still has strong reading skills?
Yes. Okay. So of course, in the long time that I've been working with these children, we've seen children with just a broad, varying degrees of language capabilities and speech capabilities. And we have seen a number of kids who are completely nonverbal or minimally verbal, or certainly not as verbal as one would expect of a child at that age. And so and for those kids, we again use, we try to guess what it is that they want to say, or set up a situation. It's something that we know is interesting, and sometimes it's food, and sometimes it's letters, and sometimes it's trains or whatever. And then we write those things on Post-its or on the screen or whatever, and help the child then either, or some people use the devices in order to have the kids and write the words under pictures, not just pictures, but words under the pictures, written words, because very often we find that the kids can use those kinds of written supports.
Yeah, so that's one of my favorite therapy stories since COVID started and we all moved to teletherapy. But I worked with a student who was largely nonverbal, and just very uninterested, not engaged. You know, he had his needs met and didn't see the need in communicating. Until I started working with him and realized, oh my goodness, he's hyperlexic. And so immediately we got him fit with a device, and we made sure that he could have, you know, the written words by the pictures, but also he had access to a keyboard. And he's a tremendous speller. And so when he can't find a word quickly, he'll just type it right out to us, and then the device will, you know, be his voice output system. And with COVID now, he's at home, and mom is able to see him with his device, and mom had no idea he could communicate as much as he can. And so that's been one of these kind of beautiful silver linings, is that now we're able to engage with the parents, but also just that this device was hugely helpful for this hyperlexic kid, and he just picked it up like that. I mean, I have to do very minimal training for him to know how to communicate with that, and just the joy on his face when he's communicating now. You know, hyperlexia is so easy, makes AAC, I think, learning so easy. So I definitely recommend the device route too.
Yeah, no, that's a good story. I like that.
Yeah, no, he just makes me very happy, and he's just been so successful. So I'm happy for him.
Okay, so we have two big camps of areas that we'll go into, kind of social skills and reading comprehension. So let's start with social skills. So kind of broadly, how can you work on social language and conversation skills with a kiddo with hyperlexia?
Okay, so I'll start, but please jump in.
Absolutely.
Okay, so one of the things that I like to say is that rather than always trying to get our child to join other kids as to what they're doing, I usually like to try to get other kids to join the thing that our child likes to do. So we set up a situation. Either it can be a structured game, or it can be, you know, something, you're making something or cooking or eating or whatever it is that your child really loves to do. And then you bring in a sibling if you're there at home and if they're willing, and or another in a classroom, another child to play the game. And then what you do is model and write the phrases that are used within that activity. So if it's, you know, with COVID, it's really hard to play with other kids other than families at school, but it would be, you know, even if you're outside in your yard, you might script something to say to somebody else, and have that person join the activity, even if it's jumping on the trampoline or you know, doing sprints or whatever, and then the kid in the yard next door is doing the same thing. You know, so go ahead.
Oh no, so one of the things that Phyllis actually said in a consultation was to take a picture of your child playing with a sibling or with a peer, and then you can kind of show what you're expecting that verbal communication to be. So I'm just going to share my screen right now, and this is just a general picture I found on Google, so you can take whatever your child is doing, and then via technology, you can script right on that picture, and I'll just draw a giant text bubble and say, you know, I'm expecting her to say, it's my turn. And so you're just writing this out. Of course, if you've got pictures at home, you might put a Post-it right there on the picture, or I have sticker speech bubbles that I'll kind of put somewhere, and you can kind of script out what you're expecting to say. And I think important too, especially during this social communication, is that you want to make sure that you're also giving them the language in order to negate or disagree. I think that'll avoid a lot of arguments, because now they've found a way to verbally say, no, thank you. And so she might be like, no, it's my turn. So make sure that you're also kind of teaching and scripting that out. No, it's my turn. And so you might do this with can you join me? Or do you want to play, and just visually scripting this out. Something else that I have up usually when I'm playing a game is I'll have a rule page. And so I will, let me just get rid of that really quickly. You might say the first step is one, pick a card. The second step is look at colors. And so on top of supporting their verbal communication, make sure that they've got that kind of visual schedule of what the rules are. And I often will review that before playing and interacting. I also would use a lot of social stories. I think just writing out socially, like, sometimes I will win a game. I feel happy when I win. Sometimes I lose. That's okay. And so you're using these social stories to kind of give that internal monologue and give that script of how they should be processing certain social interactions.
Yeah, and I think your point of like using real pictures of your child is like such a brilliant thing. And you don't have to make these really fancy. You don't have to spend a million years on them. You know, you take a few pictures, throw it in like your word processor, and then you can just type up what you need. And it doesn't have to be this fancy thing, whether you're, you know, a parent or an educator, you could just make something real easy. And that'll be much more practical.
I think the tools that I really recommend the most are, well, Post-its. I really, really am a fan of the whiteboards because I just find them so easy. If you want to, you know, replace a word and show that flexibility of language, you can just rub out a word and change it with something new. And I like just being able to show that visually. And then I usually like to recommend laminators. And so even if there is just a page that you can have, you can kind of laminate over that picture and just write all over it, erase it, and use it for another script another day. I think those are good strategies too.
Yeah. So, you know, when we started developing therapy ideas, and I, there were, first of all, you know, there weren't any computers very much, and certainly we were not using Zoom. So some of the things, but some of the things that Kira's been able to do is take some of the non-technical ideas and use them with the computer generated things, and you know that just heightens the interest so much. But it can be done anyway, you know, if you don't have all these things at home. You know, it's sometimes hard to do all the computer things at home with all the things that you're expected to do. But you don't have to do this. But when you do it, it's just so powerful. It really does work.
Kira, there's a follow-up question.
The other thing I just wanted to say, one more thing, is that I forgot to do our very first, most important thing that we do when we first meet a child, and that is make a list.
Yeah.
The kids. So, you know, during an evaluation or you know, so that kids can see what it is that they are expected to do. So, you know, if I'm doing an eval, I'll say red book, blue book, gray book, questions, and then I usually put, you know, number 5 or number, say hello. So I'll put number 5, something that the kids really want to do. It could be a break, could be a snack, it could be playing with trains, it could be whatever, so that they can see that if they do 1, 2, and 3, and then we cross it off. That's one of the major things that works, because just the verbal may not be processed well enough. Say, oh, first we're going to do that, and later we're going to do that. They're not so great if they're Gestalt processors. And so the visual list really does help, and it helps for executive functions, and it helps for scheduling, and it helps for school, and it helps at home. Just that's if you've learned one thing from us today, that's one.
Yeah, I think using it for like activities of daily living, if like going to bed is a challenge, like writing out your routine of what needs to be happening every night, crossing it out. It's also really helpful when there's going to be changes and transitions. Those are often really challenging times. And so we can note that like here was our plan, but oh, we had to make a change, and you can draw an arrow and move something around to kind of visually show that a change had to happen.
Yep.
Mhm.
So I think too, just talking about transitions and change, I mean, you can do it as it's happening. If there is a last minute change, yeah, visually erase it and put something else and say it's a change, it's still fine. But then also they're able to see in the beginning of the day that there's going to be transitions later on. So it gives that extended time to kind of process and get ready for that transition. And it's not a surprise change. So it's much easier to, today on Wednesday, we go to the library at school. And so you're kind of outlining that so they know what to expect. So the transition's often a lot easier.
And then sometimes I'll frame those changes in a big word, like it, this is unexpected, because something could happen that is
Yeah.
unexpected. And so you sort of teach that so that, some of the kids really like big words. And so if you say, oh, that's an unexpected thing, or an unanticipated event.
All right. So before we get into the reading comprehension, which I said was that next, a lot of questions around that. There was one follow-up question, Kira, about someone asking just what is a social story? They hadn't been familiar with that term.
Sure. And so I have some resources that I think I'll probably just include in the email that we send out afterwards as kind of a summary. But a social story is typically a story that's written in the first person, that's describing an event or an expectation or a feeling. And so I will often share a social story of I have actually some on my screen that I might be able to share. I don't want to take up too much time, but you're using short, simple, positive sentences to explain a process or expectation, if that makes sense. So I use them a lot for potty training. I know that we were probably going to get to that a little later, but it might be, I need to go potty. I feel full. First, I go to the bathroom. Then I disrobe, do whatever your steps are. You can be as specific or broad as you think would benefit your child most. But I really love them because I think they are teaching that internal script, but it's also just like teaching how we're expecting them to be processing new things. So I know that I have written actually a couple for, my kids are going to Disneyland. It's a new thing they've never done before. They've got to ride on a plane. So I help write, this is how we ride a plane. This is what we do at an airport. This is who we're going to see at Disneyland. It's really just kind of prompting and giving them that language to have prior to something happening. I also, for some of my kids at school, we read the same social story every single day. It's part of our routine, and it's part of when I need a break, I can say, I need a break. And you're just kind of really visually giving them that model of expectations rather than just verbally telling them directions all day.
And they can, the stories can be used to develop narrative skills, to tell what has happened during the day.
Right.
And because this is one of the things that the kids typically have difficulty with, is creating a story. And so you can use those pictures to describe and into it, and also use it to tell daddy when he is ready to listen, or to FaceTime with grandma and tell her all these things. So
So I have two things I just want to add to follow that up. I'm going to just share my iPad screen for a second here. If it's going to work for me. And I can show you what that might look like. I don't think it's going to work for me right now. But then I'll also have kind of this, it's not necessarily a social story, but it's a social script of how I might, actually here it is going to work for me. So this is a social story on potty training. So you can see that there is a visual schedule that they can kind of tap through. And it's just those very short, concise directions. And then there's a full social story that will read to them and that they can read.
I go potty too. Sometimes I need to pee. I do not like it when I go potty.
So that's just an example of a social story that's on an app. I think it cost me $1.99. My kids love it, but I also like that you're not seeing the whole thing at once. So they're kind of regulated in the information that they're getting. I'll also do this for kind of scripting those narratives that Phyllis was talking about. I'll write out kind of the script of what a conversation or what a narrative might look like. We call this, you can call this kind of guided narration, guided writing, where you're leaving some blanks that they need to fill in with words for their script. You guys can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. I think that this level where I have these blanks though, this would probably be after you've practiced this script with all of the words for a couple weeks before you start kind of scaffolding back and taking away words for them to start kind of putting in their own words and creating their own narration there. So that's kind of a social script that I would use for that conversation too.
Great. Okay, so we're going to switch gears, like I said, and kind of go into the reading comprehension because we did get a lot of questions about that. So just kind of generally, what are some ways to support reading comprehension? Because sometimes we see a big difference between reading skills versus kind of retaining and remembering and being able to answer comprehension WH questions about material.
Okay, so reading comprehension is not just one thing. It's not just answering comprehension questions. So first of all, kids who are Gestalt processors very often have trouble with the WH questions. And so that it may be that they do understand what they're reading. And I always say they can understand what they read as well as they understand language. But since very often language is compromised in some way, then the reading comprehension then is also compromised in some way. So the other issue is the background knowledge. And so these kids very often in the way that they learn, what they see is what you get, and what they don't do as well is pick up things from the background. And so they may not be aware of just incidental information that an author of a book may assume that the child would automatically know, but our kids may not know that. I often say, I can read my husband's physics text, but I don't have the schema or the background information to really understand that. So, but if I was taught some of the concepts in a particular text, I could understand what it is that I was reading. So, and I'm sure we've all had that kind of experience. So it's a very similar kinds of things. So we have to, the National Reading Panel in 2000 had a kind of a schema for understanding what read for reading comprehension. And I used that when I created a reading comprehension kit and with multiple choice tasks. But the first thing is building a schema. Oh yeah. Oh, you have it on scale. Yeah, it's available actually through ProEd. As well. It's published now by ProEd. It used to be published by Linguasystems, but anyway, but that pattern, the first part is, I think you could get rid of that. the pattern first is to look at the pictures and see the sequence of that, and then there's a series of questions. The other is to build schema, which is talk about what you know about what the story is about. And the next is to be able to label pictures with the vocabulary that's used in the story. And the other is to understand, actually match definitions of the words. So there's some things that you need to do to kind of help kids understand. And then very often young children's books, like Elephant and Piggy or Frog and Toad, have much of the information is conveyed through the illustrations. And there are very few words in some of those books, or wordless books, which Kira will show us in a few minutes. So that you have to discern not just from the language, but also from the situation and what you know about how people operate. So in Elephant and Piggy, and there's one about pigs make me sneeze. And so he thinks that that Piggy makes him, Gerald thinks that Piggy makes him sneeze. And so kids have to understand about allergies and what an allergy is and why would anybody make somebody sneeze. Most typical kids have heard that concept or have that idea. And then at the end of the book, he finds out that he has a cold. And then he runs back to Piggy and says, I'm sick, I'm sick. He's so happy that he's sick. But why would he be happy that he's sick? So again, you know, it is helping, even though our precocious readers can read way above the language level of the story, they may not pick up the social parts of it and the unstated parts of it and the reading between the lines part of it. And so we have to provide that, and we can provide that in writing, some explanations, and we can play it out and we can act it out and we can figure out, you know, what's the difference between an allergy and a cold and all that kind of stuff. For older kids, we have made graphic novels from novels that they're reading in 3rd and 4th grade. And so that they're actually making the illustrations to help us figure out what the story is about. So, okay, Kira.
Yeah, so I have a lot of things I want to add, so I'm going to go a little fast, so I apologize for that. I think, too, exactly what Phyllis was saying is there's a lot of different steps to reading and language comprehension, and so I really focus a lot of time on WH questions. And there's really 2 parts to learning WH questions. You have to, one, understand what they're asking so that you're getting appropriate answers, and then go into getting accurate answers, right? And so quite often I'll be very explicit in my teaching of my WH questions. So let me just pull up a resource that I have here. I will usually have this out at all times so that, you know, when we're asking a who question, the child can visually recognize that who word, go to their cue and say, okay, I know it needs to be a person or a character or an animal. Who is that going to be? What, and it just kind of gives them kind of even the schema, I guess, for what the WH question is asking in the first place. Before we get to WH questions, if we're trying to assess comprehension, then I'll often use closed sentences and I'll have them written out. And so we might be asking, well, actually, let me just show you. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but here's the story I'll show you. I'll re-explain in a little bit. I might ask the question, you know, how is he feeling? And rather than expecting my student to answer, I might put scaffold and script the answer. He is feeling like this. And then to help support, I might put mad, happy, and then the student can just circle the answer, underline, rewrite it up here, however you're doing that. So I'll often assess and support comprehension just using these closed sentence scripts. Also, just so you guys are aware of some resources, there's this social story that I actually really, really love. And it's, again, it's by Touch Autism. It's the same social story writers who wrote the potty training one, but they have a social story on WH questions. And so it'll kind of just go in like, what is
you play with today?
It'll practice what they're asking, and then you can read about what the questions are asking. So I really like this visual social story for explaining what WH questions are. It kind of gives them some scripts of how they can answer. The other thing that I really like doing is reading wordless picture books. Phyllis mentioned that. I looked up, and it's kind of difficult to find some online, but I'm sure you guys have some at home. Phyllis and I in the center would probably use a lot of Post-its to, we're writing the script, we're filling in the dialogue, all of that. This works on so much more than just the reading comprehension. It works on inferencing and taking perspective of the characters and how they're feeling. So I'll just share some resources that I have. This is a book that a lot of us use. Phyllis is very familiar with this
book.
Right, and so you can use language on this so many different ways. There's no words, but she's visually thinking, so you might even script, I am thinking, sorry about my writing, you guys, thinking of pancakes. Or you can say, I want pancakes, right? You can provide multiple different scripts for what's going on. You could also, this is again just writing dialogue. So you might say, if you're working on a different concept, the dog is next to the cat, right? And you're now just writing what the story might say. Or the dog is waiting for food. I mean, you can do so much with this. And then I think the first couple times you'll probably do all of the writing, but then you're going to see your student want to do the writing and want to write the story or fill in your closed sentence prompts. And again, those closed sentence prompts are sentences that we've left incomplete for the student to complete. So I really like this, and you can just buy it right from Amazon. There's also this really neat website that it's called the Literacy Shed. And it's all about teaching behind the scenes, building that schema. It gives you lesson plans, and there's a lot of wordless videos. I found these to be hugely engaging for students, but if you just watch a little bit, I would pause this now, and you can either, if you're on an iPad, I think there's an annotation thing. You can get a Post-it and post it right on the screen. You can take screenshots of it, and you can just write, oh, you know, speech bubble, I feel mad. If you're working on prepositions, you can say the frog is on his head, and maybe your student can fill in, or your child can fill in, the frog is on. There, you just worked successfully on a preposition with the hyperlexic kiddo. So that's how I would kind of support that language comprehension in the middle of doing it. So Phyllis definitely went over the most important of that, priming, pre-teaching, and this is how I would do it kind of during. And then, so I know that we're very limited, but afterwards I'll just kind of go into more of that narrative. I think that's a question Sarah was going to get into next anyway. And that's how you could work on language comprehension afterwards. There's guided writing. Let me show you a picture of that. So here's a guided writing script where you'd probably, again, it's just using a lot of closed sentences in sequence where you can fill in the parts and maybe he can fill in those words that he saw in the story or found in the story. I really like this prompt, the somebody wanted but so then. And so it's kind of giving the script of how to tell a 1 to 2 sentence summary of a story. You can use this not only for reading comprehension, for just telling the narrative of your day. You can use it really for anything. So I really love both of these, as well as just some examples. If you look up this guided writing, there's a worksheet that you can work on reading comprehension directly with. There's a lot of resources. You guys should all write down teacherspayteachers.com. Tons of very affordable, if not free, resources that you can use. And so I would just highlight Jack. I don't have the right app open now, so I would open, just so you guys know, this app that's available on most of your computers. It's called Snip and Sketch, and it's my favorite teletherapy app. And you can go in there and just highlight. That's not a highlight, sorry. You can just highlight Jack. That's somebody, that's a who, right? And you're reinforcing all this language that you've used all along. Who is asking for a person, that's somebody, that's Jack. And so just kind of visually teaching all of those things. Sorry.
No, it's okay. There's like I said, I warned you, there's a lot of questions, and I warned you, we're getting through them all. I think one last one to end on, and I think it's helpful because it's a little bit related to everything, especially in this COVID era, about keeping and maintaining attention on like either unpreferred tasks or work. So how can we help maintain attention in this time? And then we are going to be wrapping up.
Okay, so the main thing I think is, first of all, at home, I think we have to loosen up a little bit and follow the kids, follow the kids' interests as much as possible and try to build on that, and not expect that home is going to be as structured as school is, and so maintaining attention is I think partly because the kids don't have really good language processing skills, and so if there's a lot of talk, they tune out for that. And some kids really just have a comorbid situation where they are ADHD and really do have difficulties maintaining attention. But yet, even the kids with ADHD can play games on the computer pretty well. So I think we, again, can use some of those screen time things that I know typical parents have told me that they're that they're very glad now that that their kids are really into some of the interactive games that are on the computer. But the key, I think, is finding the things that the kids already gravitate to and pulling on that, so that if your kid is interested in geography or the states, you can add maps, you can add continents. There's games called Stack the States, and use their interests, and in a way that's easier these days when you have single kids at home than it is. I also wanted to add one more thing before we get to piggyback on what Kara had said about guided writing. I've had really good experience with some of the older kids of having them dictate a story about their interests. So one of the kids wrote, he was very into the Disney things, and he was also into some of the popular movies. And so he created a story, well, we created together a story about Mickey and Goofy in Middle Earth. And so, so he was dictating, well, the orcs couldn't kill Mickey because, of course, Mickey is a cartoon. And so, you know, but what we did was he would say a sentence, and I would try to make it make sense so that he could see how the sentence kind of put together. It was his ideas, but then the guided writing part of it for this older child was to help him be a better communicator and a better writer. Okay, so I think we're running out of time. Is that right?
So hi everybody, I'm Kareen, and I want to thank all of you for your time today. I'm going to wrap this up briefly, but don't despair. If your question hasn't been asked, I will speak for maybe 3 minutes max, and at the end I will be sure to tee up how your question can be answered. First of all, I just want to thank our panelists and our moderator. We are so indebted to Phyllis for more than we can say, and every time we get to see her, it brightens our days, especially now in this difficult time. So being able to share her with all of you all around the world means a lot to us, and we're very grateful to her for doing this. Sarah has been such a good moderator that I'm going to add it to her job responsibilities. So I think going forward, we'll put that in her title. And then I do have to say it's actually Kira's birthday today. So she's been delightful to dedicate her birthday to helping so many people, which is really a testament to who she is and who our chat team is comprised of, people that are really dedicated to helping other kids. So a couple of things. I want to thank all of you who are listening and who are with us today, both special education providers and parents. I am not an SLP. I have a whole different professional background, but I'm here as mom. And I want to speak to the moms here on this call in particular and tell you that we see you and we hear you, and we hear the dads and the other caregivers too. You are not alone, and we acknowledge you. Because it is hard to be the parent of a twice exceptional learner, and a lot of people don't understand. And the isolation of COVID-19 has just made that so much harder. And so part of our desire in setting up this series of webinars is to share a space where we can be here for you. And we want to thank you, because making the time to prioritize this session just shows your dedication to your child, to the children that you teach and support, and everybody benefits from that. We really appreciate it. Chat is unique. We are one of the only nonprofits in the US that's dedicated to speech and language supports, and we think we're the only one. Someone may know of another. If they do, please let us know. We want to be friends. But to our knowledge, we're the only one that had a pretty established teletherapy practice before this COVID pandemic hit. And so we were uniquely positioned to bring our services to people that need them the most, and that is our goal. We are very focused on the division that this pandemic is widening for children who are diverse learners, and it makes us angry, and we're doing everything we can to fill that gap. The good news is that some of the horrible outcomes are shedding light on inequities in our society. The bad news is they're there. So if anybody who's listening knows anyone who we can help, school, organization, family, please, please, please send them our way. We work very hard not to turn anybody away from our doors, virtual or otherwise. And so that leads me to my wrapping up, which is to say this is not it. We will hold more webinars. We will be following up with this with a very short survey and some additional information for all of you who have attended. And based on interest and need, we'll structure probably some smaller group formats to enable more interactive webinar situations and specific answers to questions. Of course, we're available for one-on-one consultations, and we are actually working currently on moving all of our programs virtual. So those are our literacy programs, our social communication programs, and one of our wonderful assistant directors, Katie Trainer, is actually writing an executive functioning curriculum that we will be rolling out this summer. So there's a lot of good to come. We look forward to sharing it all with you. And again, we really want to thank you for your time today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.